Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very excited to be here. This has been a fantastic start to this conference. I want to thank Paul Raines for inviting me to participate. I want to also thank First.org to give me the opportunity to share my experiences with you and talk about cybersecurity and technologies and a platform where we can collaborate and talk about how we can strengthen our programs. It's not just an issue for individual organizations. Cybersecurity, IT, it's a challenge across the globe. I've had a chance, particularly this past year, to hear a lot of experiences and share thoughts with a lot of individuals. So I'm looking forward to doing that here today. I should probably introduce myself. My name is Brian Nisgoda. I'm the CEO of Black Swan Technologies. Black Swan Technologies is an information security consulting organization. Prior to starting Black Swan Technologies, I performed the function of Senior Vice President of Risk Management and Chief Information Officer for Sikorsky Credit Union. Sikorsky Credit Union is located in the United States on the East Coast in Connecticut. I have my contact information listed above. Feel free to send me an email. Find me on LinkedIn. I love talking about enterprise risk management, anything technical, and cybersecurity, audit related. Definitely very, very interested in that. I'd like to share my experiences, and here's an agenda of what I would like to cover through the conversation. Really, our fears, my fear of cybersecurity threats. I want to talk about what I built in a cybersecurity program, what I found most effective for our regulators. I want to share a case study around vendor management, and that allowed me to implement a cloud access security broker as a layer of additional controls. I also want to share emerging technologies. It wouldn't be a complete presentation, at least talking about a little bit about blockchain, a little bit about artificial intelligence, and where it fits in our strategic planning initiatives. I also want to share some enterprise risk management thoughts around all of these elements and how it supports ERM. So this is me. I have very often sleepless nights. I worry about all kinds of different things. I guess it's the focus of my core responsibilities functioning in risk management. I have to worry about different attack threat vectors that could impact the business and the performance of the organization. It's really, truly core to my individual responsibilities. I have to recommend mitigating solutions to lessen the impact to the organization. Things that keep me up at night, I worry about ransomware, I worry about DDoS attacks, I worry about data breaches, identity theft. I have concerns about the fraud that's taking place in the financial institution, the social engineering attacks against my staff and employees, really the Internet of Things and it impacting and causing outages for my organization. I worry about my audits. We're constantly being audited. Am I being compliant with all of our regulations, as well as vendor management? I'll drill into that one in a little more detail. So these are some of the things that keep me up at night. Now, from 2016 to 2017, we really hit our stride at Sikorsky and started implementing controls and eliminating findings that we needed to address over many, many years. I was with the organization approximately 4.5 years. I hope that you can relate to some of these events. We all share these common threats, and discussing them here together will help us come up with better solutions. Back in September, I had the opportunity to present in Ghana for the ISACA CACS conference. That conference, I had an opportunity to share a topic of what keeps us up at night. Some of those things, to be fair, that was a slide that I had used talking about the different threats. This particular slide captures everything that I covered in a 30-minute presentation. I wanted to share some of these things because it will set the stage for some of the more details of the technology that I deployed over time. So at that event, I talked about how we leveraged a cybersecurity framework. We spent a lot of time with risk assessments, but we focused on the controls and less on the threats. I invited third-party entities to come into my organization to help validate what we were building. In fact, we were the first credit union in the country back in 2013 to leverage the Department of Homeland Security to do vulnerability testing and pen testing in the organizations. We trained all of our staff up and down, from policies to spear phishing, and that awareness strengthen our frontline defenses. We're a financial institution, so we have tellers that need to ask the BSA and OFAC questions and see where the money is actually coming from. And ultimately, validating controls. Remember, that conference in Ghana was targeted to auditors. Who better to validate controls over time? But it led me to start thinking, when I prepared for this presentation, what I wanted to bring forward, particularly around vendor management. So I came up with a hypothesis. I had an opportunity this past year to attend several different events. I was in Phoenix, had a chance to talk with a lot of IT and security professionals, as well as the ISACA CSX conference in Washington, D.C. There was risk management people that I could collaborate with on vendor management in Philadelphia, as well as Ghana. So there was auditors, there were IT people, there were security professionals, and there was a common theme that started surfacing. So I formed this thought here where it's essentially a hypothesis. You can't have an effective cybersecurity program without a strong vendor management program. So as I listened to the various professionals share their challenges, there seemed to always be a common theme that could equate back to a vendor. The Equifax breach that has impacted so many millions of people, there was a component of that where we blamed the third-party vendor. So at the ISACA CSX conference, there was a gentleman that did a presentation. He was a CISO, and he worked for a supply chain distributor in the United States. The topic that he was focusing on was risk assessments and the importance of a risk assessment. But what I was listening to, and he had the opportunity to chase down the data. So there were vendors that he partnered with, or the organization partnered with, and the vendors of the vendor. So he actually traveled to the location because they were told that the data didn't leave those particular locations, those particular facilities. Long story short, he wound up being in the Philippines and speaking with the IT people of the vendor of the vendor. Again, the data was supposed to be in that location. Well, they had partnered with local providers to provide services. Those local providers had data backed up, which actually went to yet again another continent. So he was expressing the risk assessment perspective of this, and I was listening going, this at its core is a vendor management issue. Now, I'm not under the delusion that it was going to prevent a data breach, but if we can document and ask as many possible questions on the front end, we will then have recourse in the event of a data breach. So here's my case study for vendor management. When I started at the organization in 2013, I was there 4.5 years. Vendor management was an issue. It was owned by the finance department at that given time. There was a lack of accountability, no tone from the top. Contract owners didn't feel accountable. They didn't even necessarily know that they owned contracts. There was no training of staff. There was no formal approval process that they went through to determine, yes, we move forward with this project, no, we don't move forward with this project. We were missing documents from fully executed contracts. It's a common story, it's a common theme. But what do you do, and what did I do in that situation? Well, I felt strongly that vendor management was a risk management issue, and I moved it under my department. We took ownership of that. We established governance, and we did that by creating a vendor management committee, which consisted of internal audit, the finance department, IT, and security. We built in the reporting structure. I had buy-in from my CEO, and we elevated the reporting of the events that took place in that vendor management committee all the way up to the board. We wanted to give it visibility. So we also created customized risk assessment questionnaires based on the vendor management tiers. We created 4 tiers. Tier 1 was the most critical, all the way down to Tier 4, which was your janitorial paper supply companies. We proceeded to document as much as we could of all these particular vendors. We captured whether they had a security program, an incident response program, business continuity, what their financials look like, and we required risk assessments. Only then did I go and implement a cloud-based repository to store all this information. That was the last step, but very, very effective for the organization. There was tremendous benefits to be had by centralizing that. We used a product called Vendor Risk. I'm not paid by them to endorse them, but I found them to be incredibly effective, very cost effective for sure. And what it did, it allowed us to automate a tremendous amount of the process, particularly in the IT department. I was successful enough that I was able to move the IT department under risk management and provide that particular governance. You know, often IT has a number of contracts that they have to maintain. Collecting documents, automating that process, relieve the burden on IT. So it was a tremendous, valuable resource that we were able to implement. What I'd like you to do, and these are actions that you can do right now, if you're in the IT department, if you're in senior management, if you, in essence, function in any different capacity within the organization, I want you to start taking these steps right now. Hold your direct vendors accountable for the other indirect vendors. Your vendors will resist this greatly. Mine did. It's easy to do this during contract negotiation. I have a particular example where we were in talks with a vendor, and they said, we are not responsible for this vendor, this vendor, this vendor. You can use whoever you want, but there was only one vendor to use. So if we didn't use them, we couldn't implement this solution. It really boxed us into the corner. We addressed it in service level agreement. They were not pleased with that, and it is a challenge. You won't win every fight, but start with that. What I found to be most effective is tie due diligence to the money. What we did, because we had finance on the vendor management committee, all the due diligence had to be performed and completed. That means all the technical questionnaires that the IT department needed. So now they were more on the early curve of these project initiatives, right? IT is last to be told on anything. So finance would not release a check, meaning the contract owner couldn't sign the contract until all the due diligence was completed. Was this 100% effective? No, but it was 99% effective. And that's what we were striving for, making things slightly more efficient. Because remember, we were reporting up to a board level committee, so they were seeing where gaps were if documents weren't produced. Next thing that I want you to do and take away that you can implement, I want you to risk rate your vendors. You start with a spreadsheet. You don't need to use the vendor risk platform tool. I found it useful. You'll eventually find you'll need to get there, but you can start very simple. Risk rate your vendors, prioritize those, collect the due diligence information, and report the risk. Those 3 elements need to take place. Here's an example of a report that I share with senior management on the various risks. I also present this to the board of directors. I keep this very, very high level. It's an executive summary. I talk about the gaps. and the actions plans that we needed to take. Again, the use of vendor risk application. Vendor risk did not produce this report, but the data that I extract from that tool is fed into this. It was very, very, very helpful. All in all, like I said at the opening of my presentation, I view everything through an enterprise risk management lens. So I see things via risk tolerance and risk appetite, be it compliance, audit, vendor risk, IT, it all is determining how much risk the organization wants to take on. IT is absolutely critical in delivering the metrics around that. It's the infrastructure of the organization. I don't have to tell this audience that. I know you're well aware of that. So I relied heavily on what IT could produce in terms of metrics and tools to use. So let's go back to my use case scenario. So I already talked about lack of policy, regulatory pressures, risk assessments that were done. I had vendor relationships that were decades old and it was risk assessed once. I wish that was the exception. I had limited resources, as many of us do. It was financial, that was human capital. I had entitlement challenges to overcome, and I wanted to capture the shadow IT that was taking place across the organization. We were migrating from Lotus Notes to an Office 365 platform. That was the catalyst for me looking into security brokers. In that Office 365, I was also trying to address the great demand that business had. They wanted access to all the data everywhere from any device. I wanted to give them that, but I wanted to do it in a secure fashion. So how best did I tackle all of that? Before I get to that, I have to share some stats because every presentation, I believe there's a law in the United States that every presentation given has to have one slide with statistics on it, at least one. So let's look at a couple of these, shall we? By 2020, 85% of large enterprises will use Cloud Access Security Broker platform. I find that funny because when 2020 comes around, I'm sure we're not going to be calling them Cloud Access Security Brokers. They are a very valuable tool, though. The dollar spend on these particular devices had increased significantly, which either means the marketing is very good or the product themselves is very, very solid. I find the product to be exceptionally sound and has helped me. The last stat, 60% of CISOs do not believe their staff can handle anything beyond simple cyber security incidents. I can say from my personal experience in my organization, that's true. That was a struggle. We did not have adequate staff. That's a common theme and reason why we gather here at these events to find more streamlined ways of addressing that, particularly at this event because incident response is so topical. So I leveraged Cloud Access Security Broker. The one that I selected was the Microsoft platform. And I selected that primarily because I was migrating to an Office 365 platform. According to some Gartner statistics that I didn't include on that last slide, I fall into a typical situation where we're trying to capture IT shadow situations and address these tier 1 providers like Office 365. But by a show of hands, how many people in the room are currently using a Cloud Access Security Broker? Okay, great, good. I suspected we might have a good percentage already deploying that. For the sake of being thorough, definition of a Cloud Access Security Broker is a cloud-based or on-premise solution. Cloud is stronger, but it's an application software that sits between your third-party vendors and your organization and allows you to enforce your security controls. It's a fantastic tool. It allows you to have detailed risk assessment and compliance reports on very specific applications. That served me very well with my internal auditors. So if I have an happy internal auditor, then it's more likely that I'll have happy regulators when they come pay me a visit. I don't want you to think that's my only driver for all of that. I want to implement controls to protect member data. But addressing those issues is very, very high in terms of importance around that. I put together a checklist for those that have yet to implement a cloud access security broker. And it may help you in your research. So there's 8 questions in all. I wanted to walk through some of these and give some color around them. The first one is differ from security built into my cloud apps. Okay, so if you have security controls built into a particular application that's already in the cloud, is there more security controls in that app, or are there more controls that are available through the Cloud Access Security Broker? You want to at least do a top-level review of those, because you might not be able to bring all those controls forward in the broker itself. It may come down that you might not want to leverage that. Depends on the size of your organization. Does the broker protect end-to-end? So is it managed, unmanaged devices? Is it all in scope? Most of us want to address control access from managed devices. I know it's true in my organization because we did not have a BYOD. Being a financial institution, we restricted that strongly. However, I knew that I wanted to capture the shadow IT. I knew that we had vendors that I could access from my personal device. Not in entirety, but still, it was something that I was trying to bring to the surface officially. Does it provide real-time visibility and control? Does it encrypt uploaded data? That may be important. PCI compliance was important to us. We didn't have a vendor that we leveraged for that PCI data, but it was questions that we wanted to ask on the front end. So it was business to business, third-party cloud, etc. And most importantly, the last 2 really were questions that I wanted to drill on. How did it detect risky network traffic compared to existing controls I already had implemented? I didn't want to have redundancy built in. I already had a data loss prevention solution. So did I need to have Cloud Access Security Broker? And the last question, and will it introduce scale and performance issues into the organization? The way these brokers are deployed and the complexity of integrating with existing controls that you have in place, in a way you could be introducing risk into the organization just by adding another application that another IT person has to manage. And they're just going to be frustrated with all of that. So I want you to do this in the next 30 days. You don't have to really do this in the next 30 days. I'd like you to send me an email, and it's kind of like a little homework that you can give to yourself. But I think this will benefit you if you go through this. And again, it's an action step. I want you to document your use cases if you're considering looking at cloud access security brokers. And I want you to document the use cases into 3 different categories. I want low risk, medium risk initiatives, and then the high risk initiatives, because that's the order in which you're going to deploy this particular solution. We talked about catching shadow IT, and that's really the first step that you want to focus on. This is low risk. This is just monitoring and listening to what traffic's taking place, because you know your lending department has gone out on their own and stood up a service to move some data forward, and you just happen to capture it. Yes, you could probably capture it listening to your firewall logs and reviewing some of that, and that absolutely can be done, and could be an argument why you wouldn't want an access security broker. The difference is the broker gives you more granularity to enforce those controls. So start with the monitoring of the IT. So you capture the shadow stuff, and you're in monitoring mode. You're not blocking anything. That's reserved for the second use case. Second use case is more of your medium risk. This is where you're going to actually say, okay, we're going to block this. We're going to lock this down. So you find things, you share it with your management colleagues, and you're going to go, hey, we're locking this down. As soon as you start killing functionality, guess what? The business side is going to start raise questions. So this starts looking into how data loss prevention, where is it moving, malware detection, tools that you already have in place. So you have advanced endpoint threat detection implemented. All of this adds complexity. So it's a medium risk sort of use case. And by what I'm saying you're documenting are the various applications, how they're being used, that you're going to write down. You're going to prioritize this. You're building your case why you want to spend the money. If you already have it, you're justifying, you're building documentation that's going to satisfy your internal auditors. Thirdly, you have user entity behavior analytics. That's a big word for me to say. That in and of itself is open for an entire discussion. If you already have an access broker, by documenting these scenarios will justify leveraging those analytics, because if you have the ability and the resources to have personnel to review that data, this documentation will build your case. My size organization, I don't have the personnel. I had one person that was handling all of the risk management, reviewing threat detection logs, vulnerability scans. If I throw that type of technology at them, I'm just causing more problems than I'm solving. Finally, it gets down to the most critical applications, the high risk. I have a handful of critical applications that if they cease to stop for a second, it pulls the brakes on the operation of the business. That's my Fiserv core, that's my online banking, that's my lending systems, various credit card processing also fall into that category. There's a few others, but there's a handful. Those you want to categorize, and those are the ones that you want to probably enforce the strict rules on. That's going to take the longest to implement and is the most risky to implement. There's a couple different ways you can implement cloud access security brokers. Really, there's two categories that break into some other subcategories. There's the API approach, and then there's the proxy approach. Now, proxy can be with your existing proxy that you have in place, or you can do a forward proxy or reverse proxy, so there's three that breaks out to, or the API. The API and the existing proxy is the most architecturally friendly way of deploying this. And honestly, I think most of us fall into that category. Lastly, I mentioned that we needed to be PCI compliant. We didn't have third-party vendors where we shared data in that capacity. All of our PCI data resided in our core system. So it was data encryption at rest and in transit to internal applications only. From what I've read, we chose not to enforce encryption in transit because it often introduces big performance issues. I may revisit that if we chose to use a third-party vendor that was going to be looking for credit card data. But my DLP system, if somebody forwards an email or a document that had PII information, credit card information, it's going to catch it. So, but look at those scenarios. So those are the three things and action steps that I want you to take and start documenting. And it's going to build your case if you're looking to buy one. If you already have it, it's going to help you justify future spend dollars into those other technology spaces. Challenges. I apologize for so many words on this page, but really captures all of it. We talk about single points of failure. Remember those core critical systems that I was talking about? If I have a proxy that's in front of that, and now all of a sudden I have a problem with that proxy, now my critical system's interrupted. That needs to be discussed all the way up to the board level. Because if it's a single point of failure and I can't introduce some sort of redundancy with that because of financial restrictions, well, that needs to be talked about. Not all APIs are built equal. As you can imagine, every cloud access security broker vendor promised me the world that everything worked right out of the box. These are brilliant salespeople. But honestly, there were scenarios one in particular with a third-party vendor that on good faith said that they would be able to interface with our broker. The challenge came into a vendor of their vendor, which provided BSA OFAC checking services in their application. That was not supported via an API connection, or actually via a proxy connection at that case. That meant that I had to keep the new online account opening function in monitoring mode, and I couldn't enforce the policy. We had done all of our due diligence. The vendor, in good faith, thought they had given us the correct information, and in fact, they didn't know. These are the surprises that you'll come across. Poor on-premises visibility if you're doing development for your own apps. We weren't, but it's something that you want to take a look at. And is the encryption really worth the trouble? A big one is, and maybe this should be added to your homework, where when you list all your applications and you're getting closer to making a decision, you need to reach out to all of your vendors and ask them the costs associated for integration via proxy or API. That's going to be a big deal. And ultimately, you start weighing the cost of the cloud access security broker against hiring staff. You always need more personnel. So it's not necessarily another tool. Maybe you already have enough tools and you need people to be looking at that data. I found myself in that situation and weighing that. The cost of implementing the Microsoft broker as a part of the Office 365 was too attractive to avoid. And really, I just wanted to capture phase one, the monitoring of all of these solutions. So that was my deployment of a cloud access security broker. So I hope some of those steps you'll find valuable and you could take back and use at your organization. I wanted to shift gears and talk a little bit about blockchain technology. Prior to my arrival here, I read an article, and I've included it in the slide deck at the end. So forgive me, I forget the name of the author. But they were talking about blockchain technology and how it could be leveraged in the general data protection regulation. I know that's very topical. My organization was less affected by that, but still the requirements are there to look at. So this author broke it out into 5 categories: the right to access, right to consent, right to be forgotten, I love the way that's worded, right to portability of your PII information, and the right to data minimization, meaning we're going to use the least amount of data to validate who you are and use this in a particular control. So the blockchain technology really is positioned quite well to help us address this. Now, I don't know of a particular product that's already serving that up. Again, this is more 30,000 foot level, but the access, the who, what, whys, and wheres, why do you want to access my data? Well, the core of blockchain already, the information is tracked, it's time-stamped, and it's built and bundled into a block. The consent aspect, there's consent because of the distributed nature of blockchain, that consensus algorithms for approval. So each and every event has an approval ability by that individual. The right to be forgotten, meaning I want you to delete my data, I don't want you to use that anymore. Well, the PII information and the keys that are used to encrypt that data within the blockchain, again, easily executed. And the portability and the minimization aspect of it. The data is time-stamped, it's time-bound, it has a hash encryption algorithm which will make it portable, and the individuals can share any subset of that particular information. So that technology, as it matures, is going to be greatly valuable as we try to address and adhere to a regulation that doesn't have a whole lot of specifics defined in it. And I know everybody in this room is probably more well-versed on that than myself. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on the blockchain. It was topical in my conversation in Ghana. Particularly all of West Africa has been using blockchain and Bitcoin for many years, and the United States has a lot they can learn from the use of blockchain and Bitcoin. Those areas of the world have deployed it. So they're definitely leaders in that particular space. So who's not excited about artificial intelligence? I know that I am. Well, I must be, because I must get several dozen emails a day talking about artificial intelligence, smart machines, machine learning, deep neural networks, you have to say it like that, cognitive computing, natural language processing, and let's wrap it up with machine reasoning. I left off easily another dozen subcategories and higher categories of artificial intelligence. There's not an industry that's not touched by this. It makes for great reading. It's fascinating to see the advancements in every possible sector. The main area that has made the most progress, at least from what I've seen, I haven't necessarily deployed any of this. Some I have a little bit. I'm getting ahead of myself. Leverages predictive analytics. And it's the high volume. You know, the consumer products and retail industry is seeing the largest impact when you look at virtual private assistants and what Alexa and Siri are capable of doing and providing that. Look how it's just grown exponentially. So that's the voice recognition and trying to help and better serve us as humans. It's fascinating. The automotive industry, everybody needs a self-driving car. Absolutely, autonomous driving. Personally, I don't, but I appreciate them striving for that. The healthcare and insurance companies are looking for patterns in critical chronic diseases. And there's a theme to all of these that I've listed so far. It's the high volume of data that could previously not been processed without the use of these algorithms, this machine learning capability to find the patterns. Sales industry leads. I know my organization was looking at that, where they were trying to do some data warehousing, deep dive into what our members were purchasing. So we could start doing predictive analytics, anticipating and designing a product that that individual might be interested in buying from us. We were doing that on a small scale. Larger organizations have deeper pockets than my organization, and we're learning from the big players. I can say that from a security and fraud prevention perspective, the application that we deployed at our organization was starting to implement this on the back end, where they have to aggregate large number of transactions to determine if it's a fraudulent type event that's taking place. So that was interesting to observe. So I was seeing that come to maturity a little bit, but still there's a great way to go there. If you're looking for steps for building a strategy, I talked about it with my board of directors and implementing and keeping an eye on that. But I always focus on addressing the needs at hand. But if you're looking for elements to introduce into your strategic plan, is look for challenges in which you lack the resources and staffing to be successful. My particular example is those vulnerability scans that we were conducting on a regular basis, and it created thousands of data points that we had staff reviewing. Of course, the reports would prioritize them, as they often do, in high, medium, and low, but still, it took tremendous amount of time. I must tell you, I spoke to easily a half dozen different security providers going, look, if you can help me alleviate this, because I can't hire staff, so give me a solution that leverages and aggregates this and better analyzes this data. All they could do is provide staffing for me. Again, if it could be SecureWorks, it could be Semantic, it could be some of the other providers, but again, it was people. So still that was terribly expensive, so they were not leveraging that. I love the next one. Treat AI as a very young child. It's the 2-year-old running around this room right now. If we had a 2-year-old kid running around all over the place, most likely you would have stopped listening to me and be focused on that child. So multiple people would be addressing the needs of that child. Think about how much goes into that. So when you're prioritizing and thinking of opportunities, look for ones that have the opportunity to introduce the most efficiencies that you wouldn't previously have thought of because you didn't have the manpower to leverage. So remember, AI starts with naked algorithms that require a large amount of data input. So your Internet of Things input, so if you have surveillance cameras off thousands of locations, feed that data in, and you can start now using that to maybe detect people that are exploiting your ATMs. We weren't doing that, but that's some of the technology and the direction that it's heading towards. And address older challenges in innovative ways. That's, again, what I'm saying with some of these legacy projects that you might have on your plate. All in all, we're in this tremendous hype cycle. At least if you're familiar with Gartner reports, they talk about hype cycle. We're at the peak of this right now. So remember, artificial intelligence is going to solve all of our problems. Every article that I read talked about artificial intelligence it will do this. There was a lot of forward future thinking. That's not to say there hasn't been tremendous implementations. Chatbots, voice recognition, automated tools. I called Capital One prior to coming to this event, and I went through an all automated question for them to find my records to make my experience better and easier. That's all artificial intelligence in place. It's brilliant, it's fantastic. However, I'm looking more at solving the immediate needs of my organization. I haven't made a single purchase of an IT solution or a security solution where I'm just thinking, hi, I need an artificial intelligence technology solution. It's great if there was pieces and components to that, but that's not the front side of the questions that I was asking. So I heed Gartner's recommendation, and I think it's relevant here for this discussion. And I'm going to read this. Gartner, we believe that it's important for clients not to set grand expectation for AI, and that goes double for technologies that draw heavily on the idea of human-like behavior. Clients should focus on specific results they are seeking to achieve and not fall prey to marketing hyperbole. That captures it all. It's a buyer beware. So it's good be having the discussion. It's good to listen to the salespeople and say how it's leading with all of this, but few technologies are fully implementing that. Solve the problems of the day whenever possible. I guess what I'm driving at is, does everybody in this room have taken care of 100% of patch management? Has security awareness of all your staff been addressed everywhere? What about encryption at rest? The data, is it secured? I know Equifax didn't encrypt the data. That couldn't be more in our face, right? Identity access management and privilege account management. I had users that had too much access. Has everybody addressed that in this room? I'm summing this up into basics. You heard me go on at length about vendor management. Maybe a little too long, I apologize. But I am passionate about that, and I do believe it's a critical pillar to cybersecurity. Anyway, my theme is these are the basics that we need to address. I have a colleague of mine that works for SecureWorks, a gentleman I met actually in Ghana, lives in North Carolina, has a client in Connecticut. We know the same people. It blew our minds, the connection. He specializes in incident response. He should probably be at this event. He had shared in his presentation that there was not a single example that he experienced a data breach, an incident response that he had to respond to that couldn't have been addressed by either a simple configuration, a patch management, an action that needed to be taken. And this was referring to very large household name products. So he's alluding to the fact these are large vendors who are not doing the basics. So an organization like my own to large enterprise conglomerates. We need to focus on this. Final thoughts, address the basics first, please. Your auditors and your regulators are going to love it. It's going to lessen your exposure to cyber threats because you know there's more coming. Please tie the vendor management in with your incident response, and even ask those vendors to walk through tabletop exercises with you. Give them the opportunity to see that, document it, and save it in vendor risk. Now you have a central repository. Be cautiously optimistic about AI and the initiatives, and weigh the cloud access security broker versus additional resources. Do you hire a body? Do you need an additional tool? And exercise your incident response and your BCP plans. So I want to thank you for taking the time. I know it's been a long day, and you've been a great audience and attentive to listen to my presentation. I really look forward to hearing your thoughts and challenges and experiences that you're facing in your organizations. Thank you, and that's my time.